Jesse with the Great Commission Alliance here. I'm going to be doing my next several Bible Bites on the topic of prayer. If you've ever wondered what to pray for, or how do you know if you're praying according to God's will, like many Christians have wondered, this series might encourage you, so stick around. Thank you. The premise of this series on prayer is going to go something like this. We have a number of prayers recorded by biblical authors in the Bible. And if we have prayers recorded in the Bible, and the Bible is the inspired Word of God, then the argument goes something like this, that we can pray those prayers for ourselves as well, and know that we're praying according to God's will, know that we're praying for things that God would definitely want for our lives. And we have a number of those recorded, especially by the Apostle Paul, and so we're going to start there. The first one we're going to look at is Philippians 1, 9 through 11. Philippians 1, 9 through 11 says, "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." So here we have Paul writing to the church in Philippi, who he shows a lot of affection for throughout the letter. And the basic prayer that we find here is found in verse 9. Where he specifically says, "This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight." So the base part of his prayer is for this church's love. And he doesn't explicitly say if he's talking about love for God or love for others exactly here, although we know the two are related. Typically our love for others flows out of our love for God. So here, we can just think of love, I think, kind of generally, that our love would grow in knowledge and depth of insight. And so I think one of the main points that Paul is praying for here is that this church would have a love that is discerning, that is insightful, that has a lot of depth to it, that's not a shallow love, that's based in knowledge. And that's a very important thing for us to have as believers, obviously. A love for God and for others that is rooted in knowledge. But then as he goes on to verse 10, there's a key phrase, of course. In verse 10, it says, "so that." And those are always great signals to clue us in on how verse 9 connects with verses 10 and following. So he says, "so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ." And so the reason he's praying for their love to abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, at least partially, is so that they might be able to discern what is best. And of course, as believers, I think virtually all of us would want that in our lives, to be able to discern what is best as we navigate our Christian lives. But then he also says, "and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ." So our love growing in knowledge and depth of insight should result in us a purifying effect in our lives, an effect that will transform us, and ultimately will be blameless for the day of Christ when he returns to judge and to fulfill all of God's promises. And then finally, verse 11 continues on this "so that." So we also need to be filled with this love, this abounding knowledge of insight kind of love, so that we might be filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. And of course, again, I don't know what believer with any heart for God whatsoever would not want to be filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. When we think of fruit of righteousness, that can take on a lot of forms. We think of the sort of internal fruit of our character and God changing us from the inside out. But then perhaps we also might think of fruit that will come through our lives through ministering to others, through being involved in God's mission in the world. And finally, there's one, I think, really a key phrase tacked onto the end of verse 11, to the glory and praise of God, which is a theme, of course, throughout the Bible, that ultimately God's glory and value and honor and praise are the ultimate purpose of what all this is for. So again, we're starting with this base prayer in verse 9, that our love would abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight. But then we have this so that, and then we have all these amazing things that, of course, we would want as believers. And so I think we can pray this prayer for ourselves. We can pray this prayer for others. But I think we can know with confidence that this is a prayer that we should be praying as believers. And we can be confident that this is a prayer according to God's will, which we know that is, I hope, as believers, we want to be praying according to God's will. So we have a number of themes, really key themes here, that we can allow our prayer lives to springboard from. We have our love, that our love would grow and abound, but that it would be a discerning love. We have this theme of discernment, knowing what is best. We have this theme of being pure and blameless, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ. And then finally we have this theme of God's glory. And we can pray for all these things, and we can allow each of these themes to help spur us on in prayer. And you may be thinking, though, these are really general things to pray for, and that's right. But I think I would encourage us to start there. So many times we get bogged down in the specifics of God's will for our lives. We always want the details. And I would just suggest that those are important, of course, but those details will become more clear as we do this work, and we allow God to do this work in our lives in these broader senses that we absolutely know for sure are God's will for our lives. As we grow in those, I believe those details and those specifics will become more clear as we go along. Well, I hope that Bible Byte has encouraged you just a little bit in your prayer life. I hope it perhaps has given you some rails to run on as you think about, how do I pray for myself? How do I pray for others? How do I pray according to God's will? And I look forward to sharing some more of these kinds of passages with you in the future. So thanks for listening.